There was very little combat
Mhm.
in 63. In 65, there was a lot of combat. And when I went to Okinawa, when I was assigned to Okinawa, Colonel Monger, who was a lieutenant colonel, was my company commander. And I got a chance to really go through all the different situations. And it was there that he decided that he wanted me to be one of the team captains to go to Vietnam, or team captains to go to Vietnam. And so he chose me. There were 4 teams that he sent to Vietnam. He had already identified the first 3. And one day I was coming back from patrol. He would sometimes go with us, or sometimes would just stay back and watch how we train. And he called me in the office. He said, "I'm sending 4 teams to Vietnam. I've already identified the first 3. You're the 4th." He said, "Paris, you're going to have a whole all-white team. There are not a lot of blacks in special forces. Can you handle it?" I said, "If I can't, I'll learn how before you find out that I couldn't." And so he just started laughing, and that's how it started. He decided I was going to be the 4th team to go to Vietnam, and that's how it all got started. The training, the sitting down and deciding how to, if you're going to Binh Dinh province. It has to be the worst province in the world if you got to fight people, and that's where you're going to be. So we need to come up with a plan. You need to come up with a plan and come back to me with it, and we're going to make a determination. I want you to know right now, you're going to Vietnam unless you do something, you go out there and kill somebody. He said, "But you're going to go to Vietnam." And so I went back to my hooch and came up with a plan on what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it once we got to Binh Dinh province. The first thing that really got me going was the fact that the night before or 2 days before we got ready to go, Colonel Munger asked me to have all the equipment, the guns, and all the other kind of stuff. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "We'll take it down to the airfield." I said, "There, are we jumping in?" He said, "No, we're going to fly you in. And we're going to fly you in the middle of the night. And so if there's any Viet Cong there, you'll be landed, your stuff will be off the plane, and we'll be out of there." And that's the way it happened.
Wow. So was the airfield? Did you actually land at Bong Son then, at the camp, at the airfield?
No, there wasn't an airfield there at the time. We
Right.
built, but what there was a flat piece of terrain that they could take that 130, and they can land anywhere. And man, I tell you, getting that stuff off the plane, getting them out of there was really a chore to behold. It happened, and it didn't take very long to do it.
You don't say. So I've never heard of any other Vietnam veteran arriving in a covert way like that on a non-airstrip. I had no idea that even happened. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, you don't go too far, because you remember in World War II, the English never had airstrips. They landed fighter planes everywhere, and you know that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that we were breaking ice there. There have been people before us that had really done it and done it correctly.
I guess I just assumed you'd have landed at Tan Son Nhut and gone through processing and been assigned and all that, but no, you got your assignment in Okinawa, and then you headed straight there, literally landed
Straight
on the
there.
dirt.
While we were on the plane, I was assigning people where I wanted them to be once the aircraft landed, because we had to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
We didn't have anyone there to protect us. And if you didn't do it yourself, then you might not be around the next day.
That's the maddest introduction I've heard of anybody going into Vietnam. And was there even a camp there? Did you have to go and start building the camp yourselves?
We had to start at ground zero. There was, when we landed, the pilots opened the door and said, "Here we are." And he said, we want you to be out here in about 15 minutes. You got to get all this equipment and everything else. We just don't feel very safe. They landed on an unpaved field, and they took off on that same field, turned that aircraft around right into the wind, and away they went.
And then what?
Well, once they got up in the air, we had to make some quick decisions. And I like saying, I had a sergeant at that time that I didn't know really well, but I had trained with, named William Waugh, Billy Waugh. And he had a reputation already as being a super soldier and all this other kind of stuff. I'm going to tell you, just a sidebar, when we were in several fights together, he was a hell of a fighter. He was a hell of a fighter. Anyhow, getting back, we had made up our minds what we needed to do. And while we're at Okinawa, I had about $100 that I didn't know what to do with. I asked the Colonel Munger, could he get me into the PX? I wanted to buy some stuff. And he said, yeah. And I sort of took the money and bought stuff. And so when we got to Vietnam, and I was in Binh Dinh province, I used that money that I had spent at the PX, and I used it to buy things for little kids. Now, this was the key that I had already made up my mind when I was in Vietnam in 63, that kids needed to be taken care of. And once we did that, I had Hugh Hubbard, who later he died, to buy all this stuff. And we didn't give it to anyone until we actually started recruiting people. Once we started recruiting people and soldiers for our company, we ended up with a little over about 110, but we only took about 100 into battle. And we had their wives and their kids, and we really took care of the women in terms of their health right away. And there was one that had a baby, and it was really a problem because Hubbard, there's a difference the way they do it in Vietnam in terms of men and women, seeing women in that position. And so finally, she was so, it was about, you could almost see it getting ready to come out. And so they allowed him to do that. And once he did that correctly, it really worked out well. The second thing he did was that there was a mountain yard woman. At that time, mountain yard women would go bare-breasted all the time. And the first time we had some American reporters to come in, they had photographers with them, and the only thing they wanted to do was get as close as they could with the mountain yard women and take pictures of them. And I got with one of the women that was one of the aides for Westmoreland, asked us if she find shirts and stuff like that, so women could cover themselves up. So that was a big problem. That was one of the big situations I had, because soldiers were saying, or reporters were saying, well, look, they go around that way all the time, so what's the problem with us taking pictures? I said, not if you're going to get up so close that they could barely breathe, and that sort of thing. And so we didn't have a lot of women or reporters to come in, except for one case where we had gotten a person that was wounded, and he was just laying out in the, I don't know how we got him, but he was just laying out there in the field. And there was one of Westmoreland's secretary, she came by and I said, "Do you have a Kotex?" And she looked at me and eventually said yes and gave it to me so we could stop the bleeding because we didn't have anything to stop it. She went back to Westmoreland and told her that I had sort of insulted her, and he came out and said, "What's going on?" And we really got to be really good friends, and I can tell you some other stories about that. But anyhow, I showed him what we were doing, and I never saw her again. He never let her come back out in the field again.
So you were at Camp Bong Son in Tukor with A321 or
Right.
A32. So what was the mission?
The mission was to try to find a way to become friends with them and to see if we could find enough people. And we're right in the middle of the Viet Cong area. You have to remember that, and try to recruit people to join our A team, soldiers to that we could train and become a little civilian army to protect the whereabouts of the camp and the village, and also at the same time train them, because that's our main mission, was to train them so that they could help us when we decided that we had to go out on combat or to protect the village and the camp that we had.
So you're effectively there to kind of block the building up of pro-communist logistics and support in the countryside.
Well, to block it as best we could. We also knew that we were very close to a red an R&R camp for the Viet Cong, because we were right. I don't know. We weren't that far away from the South China Sea. And the other thing that we did, and you asked about the training we had with artillery and all that. One of the things we did before we left Okinawa, we also had Navy there. And I sent 2 people to be with the Navy, the gunnery part, to find out how we could call in naval gunfire. So not only did we call in air, not only did we have artillery, but we also had Navy gunfire.
Did you have support from the Seabees in building the camp at all?
No, we built it on our own, and Seabees were not. I never saw a Seabee, so my answer was a quick no, because we did it on our own.
Yeah, I did an interview with Jim Shorten, who served in special forces over there, and he was ex-Navy, so he got on really well with the Seabees, and they came and helped him build his camp.
See, that just went right over my head. If now you tell me.
Yeah.
Now you tell me.
Yeah, Jim could have helped you. He was probably in country when you were in, because he was in the Navy first, and then he went Army, and then later became a para-rescueman in the Air Force. So he did all 3 services.
Yeah,
quite an amazing chap. So that was the mission. You're in the camp, and you're recruiting in the regional forces. Who would you call them? Rough Puffs, Regional Popular Forces?
Well, yeah, you could call them that. I never called them that. I just call them soldiers that we were trying to get into our military until we got them in, and then I would call them soldiers or some facsimile so they could understand.
And I guess so. You formed the 883rd Vietnamese Regional Force Company.
It was really the 441st Regional.
Right.
So yeah, we did. And
okay,
right there on the they were regional forces, and they say regional or popular forces. They were regional forces because we got them from the region.
And how can you tell us your impressions of working with them? What was the typical age? What was their disposition? Sort of how effective were they? How well did they sort of acclimatize to the training and so on?
Okay. Just to start off with, there were people or soldiers that we recruited that had never seen a folded money, never seen a bill that they could spend. But we went through that. The other thing is that we gave them all physicals. That was one of the things that Hugh Hubbard was in charge of. We gave them all physicals. And the other thing is, we found that there were some of the women there that had colds and all kinds of minor things wrong with them that Hubbard could take care of. Once we were able to get them healthy and to get their kids healthy, we then had people that were looking out for our camp, because the soldiers that we had recruited, that would be their families, and they didn't want anything to happen to their families. And knowing that the babies were being taken care of, their wives were feeling better, and they were in better shape, because a whole bunch of them, I can remember having them in a little dispensary that we had built, and they would just defecate on the floor because they had no way of stopping that, and that's what they would do wherever they were. They would, if something came up like that, they would just do it right there. And so just making sure that we found a place that we could hold them then before they came into the little dispensary that we had built, then that worked a lot better.
Right.
And I'll tell you the other thing, by having the women in a better state of mind, and their husbands knowing that, it really helped us a lot. And I had that was one of the things, and I keep saying but because I hate that is a pejorative word sometimes. Anyhow, was to let Colonel Munger know what we're trying to do. And he approved it. He said, we haven't tried this before, let's see what happens. So it worked out really well. And the other thing is, not only that, but if something happens, you've got someone who's going to be looking out for your camp and for you. If something goes wrong, they're going to be right there and they'll let you know. We had 2 people that were assigned to us by the district chief that lived with us and did a lot of other things in terms of letting the district chief know that we had their best interest at heart. And so he then became less reluctant in terms of having me answer every little question about this, that, and the other. Once he felt really comfortable. The other thing was a carton of cigarettes and a bottle of whatever, did miracle things for someone like that. Because that gave him a chance to give his province chief a carton of cigarettes or whatever the hell it might be, so that he was in good graces there. And sometimes stuff like that, just you don't know what's going to happen. It just happens. So that's where we were. I don't want to take credit to where I don't deserve it.
Let's move on to your team then. So I know some of your team members were Major Cole, and you've got Billy Waugh, you've got Bobby Brown. I can't remember his first name, Morgan.
And the most important person for me was David Morgan.
David Morgan, right. And Ron Dice. And were there others, or is that pretty much the ODA?
Yeah, that was very much. Here's the deal. When I first got there, Hubbard and Morgan on separate occasions when I'd be out training or whatever. They say, "Hey, sir, can I just speak to you for a moment?" And they would just come up and say, "I got your back." And then they would just, I guess they had decided among the two of them that they were going to say that to me. And so it really helped, because in terms of Hubbard, that money that I had given Mongers to let me go into the PX, he bought all kinds of things that he gave to some of the women and candy to all the kids. And so already he had made friends. The other thing that I didn't tell you, we had 3 animals. We had a dog, we had a small bear, and we had a monkey. And the monkey was really, really smart. And I can remember we were having dinner, the ones of us who were there, and Hubbard was trying to teach Joe, the monkey, how to use a knife and a fork, and with a bib on. And I can remember a guy we call Rat. We were in there sitting down, and Rat said, "You just said that monkey was smarter than all of them, but God damn it, I can use a knife and a fork and he can't." And so, it's just stuff that went on sometimes like that.
So I guess what was there? Did you have a lot of fun in the downtime in the camp, or was it always a grind of work while you were there?
No. It was stuff like that, and the thing about it is, if you're too strict, it doesn't really work. Now, the other thing is, and this is just another sidebar, if 2 guys did not like each other or they had a problem, when I was on guard duty and everybody had to pull guard duty, including me, I let them fight. They couldn't use any knives. They couldn't use a roll of quarters or anything like that. And I would pat them both down before they decided they were going to go at each other. I just found out that if you do that, it just clears the air everywhere. Now, if you're on patrol, you better make sure that the one in front and the guy that he was fighting in the back, not on the same patrol or whatever, you won't have any problem there. But it worked out. And I got in a couple fights. There's 2 things I would do. No, I never went into town or anything with them. I always would lend them money if they wanted to go and have a drink and stuff like that. It was just a part of my, I guess, disposition, where if you start drinking with soldiers, you got a problem. I never did that. And they would offer me, "Hey, well, we got someone that we really want you to meet. You really like her," and so forth and so on. I never took that step.
Yeah, so you kept a bit of separation from the men to maintain that respect.
I would lend them money and stuff like that if they needed it, because they always paid me back. But I did not do that. I did not go out and party with them.
So what sort of operations went on before July? So between April and July?
We went on a lot of operations with X number of the soldiers that we had trained to find out where we might find places that they could hide weapons or do this or do that. The other thing is, we when we would go into the villages and all that, we would always stop and I would have one of the 2 men that we had from the district headquarters to ask questions. And then we had people like Waugh, if he was with me on that patrol. I only would take one of the E8s, and we had 2. One was the intel, and Waugh, who was the team sergeant, to to be out there with me when I was on operations, just in case something happened. We always had a medic. We had two of everything, and we could break down into two even halves of having one officer enlisted on one side and then enlisted on the other side. I only had one officer, and that was me, because we had to send the other officer back. So that's how we could divide the team up, and not only that, but we found out that a lot of the Viet Cong were not really good soldiers. There were several times when we'd be out on patrol and we would stop and we could hear somebody snoring, and we could go, and that's how we found a couple of these guys, because they had just started snoring, went to sleep. And so it was easy to go up and get them. And that's how when we went out on this big operation, we found two guys that had actually fallen asleep. And so we got information about where the major part of their operation was being held or housed. And so that's how we got the information. The other thing that we did was, if we got a wounded soldier from the other side, we would feed him and give him a cigarette or two and let him stay right there and where we found him. And we would have a mountain guard or someone from a distance to watch over him all night to see if someone would come and get him. If no one came to get him, then we know that we probably had someone that would come to our side and give us information. And so it was just a matter of bringing him in, feeding him, and interrogating him, and then eventually he would come to our side, or we would never see him again. There were a lot of little things like that we sort of picked up on our way in and out that really worked to our advantage.
Did you worry that a person like that might chew hoy in a sense, but actually be working for the other side?
Oh, all the time. Another operation. This is another thing that happened, since you brought that up. We had a small fire that happened, and we cleared out everyone and brought them back in. I noticed at that time that there were two people from our teams, from the team that we had gotten to become soldiers for us, that were missing. We did it a second time, and they were missing. So when they did come back, I gave them over to the district chief, the district commander there, and they found out that they were Viet Cong. I wouldn't have known that if we hadn't had that small fire, and we had the second time where that became something that we noticed. And the thing that was important here is that weapons, grenades, and all this other kind of stuff, you had to keep it right there. And if they knew where it was, then we had a problem right here in River City. So we were pretty cognizant of that.
Right. So they'd be stealing military equipment.
Absolutely. Anything they could that had American, or they thought was America. Because I tell you, America could do no wrong there, because of the way we treated people and the equipment and all that. It was just really superior. The other thing is, we were wearing the new jungle boot. That jungle boot was worth its weight in gold. If you tied the shoe up tight, if you allowed people to be sloppy where they wouldn't tie up their shoe, it could stop a mine. It could do a lot of things, because all they had to do was be in a position to hook something on the ground or whatever. Then you got really a problem. So all that stuff came into being. And a couple other things, and I'll tell you so I don't forget. number one, there was a reward out for Billy Waugh, the Viet Cong. After we really had gotten to be good, they put a reward out for him. I don't remember the peso, but it wasn't a lot of money. But they had a reward out there, and they wanted, a couple of guys wanted to do like they do on a Western, give him over to the enemy, then go in there and get him and get the money too. I said, no, this ain't going to work right here. So we need to let that go. But and then later on, it happened to me, but not at the rate or the intensity or the apogee as it was with Waugh.
After we became known in Bindin province, there was a reward that they put out, not for me first. It was first for the team sergeant, that they had a reward out that if you killed him, you would get a reward. And later on, it fell down to me. I was the second one. But it was one of the funniest things. There were a couple of our soldiers that thought that what we could do is we could order Waugh up and let them capture Waugh. And then we get all that money that supposedly they had, and we could bring Waugh back. He didn't think it was an idea. At first, I thought it was a good idea until they put out most wanted on me, and then I didn't think that was a good idea either.
So at that time, in spring of '65, then what an early summer, what was your estimation of enemy strength and readiness in your area?
I thought that there was, at all times, there were at least a battalion plus. And when they had that big offensive that had just happened before we got there, they had almost a regiment there. And it was and we'll get to that big fight. But they had soldiers, they had caches, they had everything that they needed that they could be gotten to in a quick moment. The other thing that became really obvious was the number of bikes that you could find that were around, and you could tell almost the number of people that were coming in via coming down the trails right next to this South China Sea that they could ride to get to the camp.
And did you have a sense of what their mission was?
Initially, I didn't know, but the other thing was that they weren't fighting us, but they would fight the Marines. They had battles with the Marines because once we got into that big operation, there were Marine shirts and some other stuff that they had gotten, and I made an assumption that it was when they were having when they were fighting Marines. There was a time when we were on Okinawa before I went to Vietnam. I talked with the female Army lieutenant colonel who was a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and she said she tried to tell the Marines that the Marines thought that the Viet Cong could see really well at night, and she said, "Captain, they can't see that well at night. They live in the areas, but we can't convince the Marines. They just think that they can see better than we can, and that's not true." And that was really important to know, because once you get out there and you start fighting them, you need to try to cut off all the avenues of retreat or whatever, because the battles would really last at least overnight, and we got in a lot of those.
So was the camp attacked between April and July?
That's a good question. Let me give you an answer. Initially, when we got out there, we would get that throw grenades and do this and fire and all the other kind of things. that dissipated itself once we start training the soldiers and we start taking care of their families. Because then when we have our lookouts and we had soldiers that were out in the near our camp at night before we bring them in the daytime, they were in a position to help stop that because their families were at risk. And it just worked out. Now, this is one of those things that we hadn't planned for, but it just happened. By taking care of their families, they took care of us. Also, it brought up, it made it a lot easier for me to command them. And when we had the big battle, as God is my witness, one patrol got lost a little bit. I went after them, but everybody else stayed there and fought. I mean, we lost a lot of people, but not one of them left. And we had Nungs, part Chinese, part Vietnamese. We had the Montagnards and we had the Vietnamese. None of them left. It was just a battle that lasted for almost 2 days. Advantage. The other thing I would always give the chief of the Montagnards a little money every time we came back from a patrol. So he had control of those, and they never went against him. I can remember we came back from a patrol that lasted for about 3 days, and the chief's wife would always come out, and she would also always have a glass, and she would give it to him, a glass of something. And one day he didn't come back, and 3 days, and I wasn't on that patrol. 3 days she would be out there waiting for him. Anyhow, that was just another story that goes on and on. And I was getting ready to go patrol one night, and we only fought at night. And that was the other thing that I'll tell you about in a minute. But she just stayed there, and I stayed out there with her for a while. Anyhow, we became friends. I don't know what happened to her, because while I still had the team there, that's when I got shot up and I was evacuated. And I'm going to ask you what happened to me in a minute. But anyhow, that was one of those things that it was just a spur of the moment. And you start talking about love and all this other kind of stuff. Maybe it was just devotion, I don't know. But to see a woman out there in the middle of the night with her little glass that she would give to her husband when he came back or whatever, and I would get ready to go out on patrol, and she was still there.
On your equipment. So what was your primary weapon?
I had an M1, believe it or not.
A carbine.
At that time in '65, they didn't have all the stuff. So you might thought that we had that. Now, when we got into a fight, I picked up a 47 that one of the enemy had dropped, and I used that a little bit. But I fired a lot with my little finger because my hand, you can't see it. It's sort of messed up. So anyhow.
Was that an M1 Garand or a carbine?
I had both.
Right.
When we really started getting into it, I used a carbine, because you could take the sear on there and you can file it down and you can almost have a machine gun. So anyhow, that's just Davis.
Right. I think on our reconstruction we might have given you an M16.
Thank you very much, sir.
You got an upgrade. Because I think we had it in our heads that that the team leads would have all carried M16s, and then the regional forces would have had carbines.
Right. It checked. The other thing is, sometimes, and I can't remember the guy who said that, he was an American who was the Secretary of Defense. He said, "You go to war with what you got."
Mm-hmm.
That's a true statement, and it was true in World War I and World War II. By the way, I had a poet, and his name was Rupert Brooks, English, and he wrote a poem called "The Soldier." And I always would use 2 lines before I'd go into battle. If I should die, remember only this of me, that some corner of a foreign field is forever England. And I used to say, it's forever America. We had a big operation, the one that I really got shot up on. We had called in the 105s, and we were on it was a plateau. And they were really, they meaning the enemy, was just everywhere. And after the battle, we were walking out there on the plateau. There were so many bodies, you couldn't see the green grass. So, and that's the operation where David Morgan was killed, and I don't know what happened to me. So it was just it was one of those things that it just happened. I saw the flash. Morgan was in the door. I bent down to pull him back up, and when that happened, I got shot with a machine gun. He shot me across the helicopter. The only thing that saved my life was the gunner who was killed on the other side in the chopper. And I can remember the co-pilot had taken a bullet between the eyes, and the pilot he couldn't have been more than, I don't know, 16, 17, 18 years old. He said, "Is there any fucking body on this aircraft?" And I said, "Yes, me." He said, "Take the fucking stick and let's get the hell out of here." And so that's how I got back to Bong Sung, but I don't know anything. I don't know how I was evacuated or anything else. But anyhow, he died. By the way, the pilot, once he landed the aircraft, he too, I was told, was killed or died. So it is what it is.
So it was that's quite shocking. Was that the last thing you did at Bong Son before you were so you were rotated out at that point?
I didn't rotate out. I was carried out by that incident I just relayed to you. I don't know what happened to me. I know that I was told that the helicopter landed back at Bong Song. I don't know how I got from there, because I can remember one of the doctors, and I was out, I guess, for about, I don't know, 4 or 5, 6 days, maybe even longer. One of the nurses or somebody came in and told me that I had so many bullets in me that the doctors took shifts in terms of getting them out. So that's what I was told. I don't know if that's true or not.
And after that, you were still able to serve because you did another tour in Vietnam.
Yeah.
I finished that tour in Thailand, and that the Thais were really concerned about their borders and how to protect them. And I took, after I got better, I took a B team. I was a major at the time, and I went from we were up at Song Bay, which is a town in Thailand, and I met with the king and some others, and we were there to try to see what we could do to help them fight the terrorists that were coming from every which way. And because I spoke a little at that time, a little a different language, it was really helpful to be able to use that up there in Chiang Mai and some other places in Thailand. But now I can barely say hello in it. So that's
So,
just-
I imagine you'd have thought the domino theory was definitely happening because Vietnam was under threat, Laos had a civil war going on, Cambodia had a civil war going on, and you're saying it was also happening in Thailand.
It was. The other thing is that all those countries are right next to each other, and the Thai, the people from Thailand, especially the king, who had been in an automobile accident and had lost one of his eyes and some other thing, but he was still up by the time that I got there, and they were really concerned that what was happening in Cambodia and in Thailand, because it didn't, or Laos, it didn't appear that there was any law in these other countries, because the French were there, a whole bunch of other people were trying to establish themselves as the country that Laos wanted to deal with, or Cambodia wanted to deal with, and so it was just one of these things that, as best he could, he wanted to protect his borders to see if he can maintain Thailand as sort of an independent country, because as you may or may not know, Thailand at that time had not been in any wars. It had always been able to divorce itself from all the surroundings, and it was a place that was a very beautiful country, but at the same time they could see themselves beginning to lose control, because from so many different angles, the Laotians and the people from some of the other countries were trying to get heavily there, because at that time the war was going down but drugs were going up, and that was a big thing in Laos and Cambodia, selling drugs, especially to other countries in Europe and America. So that was one of the things they were trying to stop from happening to their country.
So, I mean, is it fair to say that you were, as a major on a B team, less involved in actual fighting once you're on that third tour, and you're more involved in the strategy and the sort of tactical deployment of soldiers and camps and things?
Yes, that's true, but there was a couple of times I never fired a shot in Thailand, but the people at the headquarters in Thailand sent a couple, three of us up to Chiang Mai, which is right on the border. It was you had to get on a railroad the railroad train that went from Thailand down where Thailand was, or Song Mai there, all the way up to Chiang Mai, which was on a big bridge that wasn't very safe. But anyhow, it was that. And the other thing is that I really felt that if we didn't do something in Thailand, that Thailand was going to fall. But later on, they increased their army. They got better as fighters. They had special forces there. At that time, we were called the 46th Special Forces Company, if I remember, and that's what it remained.